You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And Andor is finally here. Up until now, we've been talking about trailers. We've talked about information, casting news, all that stuff. Andor finally is upon us. We had the first 3 episodes actually released this past Wednesday. We were supposed to do this review on Friday, but things just got out of control for both of us on Friday. Yeah, I mean, work, and then I had a migraine, and it just, I mean, we were pretty much going to go live on Friday right up until just about the time that we were supposed to go on, and I just basically realized, like, you know what? If I try to go on, it's just not going to be a good show. With the work schedule, even trying to watch Andor, you know, I'm like watching it half tired, half dead, and all that stuff. So I wanted to be able to watch it, all 3 episodes at once, which I actually didn't really get a chance to do until earlier today. But yeah, it was pretty heavy actually. There's a lot to digest in it, and I took notes on pretty much every episode. Like, I got all these bulleted notes and stuff for it.
Look at you.
Yeah, I know. Well,
back to school, back to Star Wars.
Hey, man. You know what? And in fact, here, let me do this, because Voyager's asking what we do for work, and it made me realize that I hadn't even really set up. I'm like in such a hurry to get this thing on. I didn't even set up.
We're pimps.
Yeah,
that's
I wish.
just, you know.
I was gonna say I wish, but I don't know. No, actually, we work for a production company and a live events company. And so, you know, a lot of times that takes up, I mean, there's a lot of last-minute things that come up. In fact, on October 8th, which is going to be a week from this Friday, there's a chance we might have to do a pre-record. So just so you guys know how this is going to work, I mean, obviously, because of extenuating circumstances, our review of Andor was pushed, but generally we're going to try to review them on the Friday show, because it used to be that they were releasing these things on Friday, and we wanted to give people the weekend to digest it and everything, but now that they've actually pushed the release dates back to Wednesday, to try to do it on Mondays is a little, I mean, it's a little long, you know, because, I mean, if you think about it, like in the next 2 days now, we're going to get the next episode of Andor. So it's not going to be a surprise as long as Andor's on for the next, I don't know, how many weeks we got left. So probably like 10 weeks, 9 weeks or something like that, because there's 12 episodes. So,
well, we already got 3 out the way. So
right.
Really,
so it's like the next 9 weeks. Yeah. There's not going to be a mystery on what we're going to talk about Friday. You're not going to hear us ask, hey, what are we talking about this Friday? Monday, that's a different story, but doesn't Tales of the Jedi actually come out?
Tales of the Jedi comes out. Actually, what's today?
Oh, does it? It's a 27th, maybe tomorrow?
Today's the 6th, so it might be out. No, it might actually already be out. I'll double check. But
yeah, you can double check that. Let me just test that. Okay, so our chats are working. That's always good. Chat's working is good. So yeah, that's basically what we do for work. We work for a production company, live events company. And a lot of times things just get dropped on us. And so when we're committing to going live twice a week, that's why we always say sometimes, you know, we might actually have to, you know, do a pre-recorded episode, or in some cases, we just find out we can't go live that day. But we really appreciate you guys, because you always hang in there. You don't punish us for it, right? I mean, it's like you guys are right there with us, and we love it. So
it's today, my friend.
Is it?
Yeah.
Really?
You're early. I knew it was only... No, I'm sorry.
It was... Well, we knew that it was...
It's October. I'm sorry. It's October.
Yeah, you do know that this is like September 26th, right?
Yeah.
You're aware that's what today is. I'm just checking this stuff.
You know,
I'm just,
leave me
hey, man.
alone.
And Voyager's actually he's more interested in what we do for a living than Andor. So he said you're like technical crew, sound and visuals. Yeah,
Yeah, pretty much.
pretty
We're
much.
part of one of the largest AV companies in the state of Michigan.
Or at least
But
well
we
on
do it
its
all.
way. Yeah, we do stuff all
Yeah,
over the country, and
yeah, we
we
just had
got
shows in Vegas and Dallas,
Dallas,
and
and yeah, Orlando's coming up, and maybe Charlotte, North Carolina. So I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot going on. And then in Michigan, we do a lot of work for Stellantis and stuff like that. So I mean, we actually have our own production company, to be honest, but we also work for this much bigger one. And as you can imagine, it takes up a lot of time because stuff comes up at the last minute. So that's the reason why we're bringing you this Andor review today instead of Friday. So we really appreciate the fact that you guys are coming in and you're sticking with us. And of course, before I go any further, I have to always get this out of the way. If don't forget to like the video, and if you haven't subscribed, subscribe and hit the notification bell and everything so you guys do know when we're going live. Because again, if you hit the notification bell, you'll actually know. Hey, Dwight's with us. What's going on, Dwight? So we got our full crew. We got some viewers. So hit the like button, guys. Let's just get that out of the way, to begin, and then we'll get into this Andor thing. So yeah, like we said, they actually released the first 3 episodes of Andor, and I could see why they did that. Because really, and they had actually said this in one of the interviews. They said, look, this is basically, they're doing, I think, they're actually going to do this with all the episodes, which makes sense because there's 12. So it would be like 4 story arcs or whatever. They're doing basically like groups of 3 episode story arcs is what they said. And this is definitely the first one. And so what's going on is that, we're meeting Andor, and of course, we're going to get into all this stuff. But, I mean, just as kind of an overview, we learn a little bit about Andor's background. So Cassian used to be called Kassa, and it was kind of like there was this, like, little tribal thing. He was from the Canary system, which is also like a planet or something. And it's basically doing something similar to what a lot of these Star Wars shows are doing, right? Where they're juxtaposing the past with the present, and they're going back with all these flashbacks and everything. And so it's pretty much the story arc is following how Cassian ends up killing these 2 guys from the corporate sector authority, which is kind of like, I mean, you're always led to believe that the Empire is the one that's in full control of every system or whatever. And from a macro point of view, that's pretty much true. But you also have these like corporations and these different, military organizations, I guess, that are directly locally in control. And in this case, in this Preox Morlana being the actual planet or whatever, or city, still not really sure whether or not it's the planet or the city.
Yeah, that is a little bit
And again,
kind of confusing.
Sure, and of course, look, this stuff is actually new. That's why I went back and I took notes this time, because there's no way in the world that you're going to remember. I mean, unless you could just focus on this, which, as we just said in the beginning parts of the show, is not really something that we can do. And Rogue One actually was very much the same way, where you were just hit with all these planets. I mean, right out the gate, they were switching locations and everything. You're like, whoa, slow down, guys. I mean, the original trilogy was nice, They spent a while on Tatooine, and then they went to the Death Star, and then, I mean, they kind of eased you into this stuff. And they didn't go into a million different locations. But much like Rogue One, you're getting hit with this stuff. Now, being that this is a discussion show, obviously we have to bring our people in the chat into this while we're yapping about this show, right? So Voyager says, I've rewatched all 3 episodes 3 times. That's admirable. Because I literally finished the 3rd episode for the second time right before the show. And I still haven't caught a lot of the details. And that's one of the things that I think separates this, and of course you weigh on this too. I think that's one of the things that really separates this from the other Star Wars shows, is that there's a lot of meat and a lot of depth in this thing. Like, you have a lot that you have to digest, and it's not necessarily, I mean, it's not like it's really that hard to follow. It's just that there's a lot really going on that you have to pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to kind of, well, I won't say that. I mean, in some ways there is a kind of a lot to follow because we keep bouncing around and you don't know exactly where we're always going sometimes. So there's times where there's, like you said, the flashbacks. So it's very reminiscent of Boba Fett, where, okay, he's going back in his mind and as he's in his back tank and reminiscing about, when he was with the Sand People, the Tusken Raiders or whatnot. But then, like in this case, they'll flash back to, and he's not even asleep or anything. It's just a flashback, and it's just like, okay,
Yeah, I know. He's just kind of like looking off into the distance or whatever,
Yeah, or he's in the middle of a conversation, and then it'll just switch to some tribal thing, and you're just like, well, what the heck is this? And you're like, okay, where these kids come from? Now it's like the Goonies or something. It's just
yeah,
like,
either that or like Lord of the Flies or something like that, which I did notice. There were no adults whatsoever, like anywhere in this village.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, are they, because, it was a whole mining thing or whatever. It's like, okay, are the adults in this whole mining facility? But it doesn't seem that way. It almost seemed like it was this village of kids that were just, I don't know, kind of fending for themselves,
like it kind of like a weird camp or something like that.
Yes.
Like they just,
yes. Let me ask you this: Did you see that new Predator prequel thing, Prey, that's on Hulu
no, I
yet?
didn't.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
For anybody that did, there was kind of a similarity to me between the Kassa, because you got to remember, when he was a kid, he was called Kassa. When he was on this whole Canary thing, he was Kassa, and then he's Cassian. So it's sort of like, at least you could sort of differentiate. And actually, going into what you were just saying, where you're like, he's there in the middle of a conversation, and boom, you're back in this, tribe of kids or whatever. That's what happened. Like, one of the characters, I forgot which character it was. I think it was his friend that he worked with, said, like, Kassa or something, and boom, the scene just switched to, the kids. But that, just the vibe of that and the look of that, and especially the look of the kids, very much reminded me of the Indian tribe that was portrayed in Prey, which is basically on Hulu. It's a Hulu-only release, and it's a Predator prequel, basically, and it's incredible if you haven't seen it. Let me get to Dwight's comment really quick here. He says, they seem to kind of using the past stuff to fill in blanks that people want to know while still telling the story they wanted to tell with the present day. And actually, I think that could sum up pretty much all the Star Wars shows that we've had so far. I mean, with the exception of The Mandalorian, they didn't really do that with The Mandalorian. Right. That's really more of a Book of Boba Fett thing.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Dwight. And, I think what they're trying to do is, in a way, trying to keep still some of the mystery there as they kind of start to reveal things presently. They keep flashing back to the past to kind of not necessarily throw you off, but just kind of keep things mysterious until we can really reveal what's really going on.
Well, and that's it. And again, there's aspects, and again, watching this the second time really did help. Because, again, it's like anything else with any of these shows, but especially this one, because just as some of the, I guess, just overall thoughts, usually we do that at the end, and we will, but, I mean, if you just look at the way that this thing is hitting you, it's very much what we always wanted, which was a genre film just set in the Star Wars universe. It's like, because I don't know about you, but I was going back and forth on this. Like, on one hand, it's very slow. It's a very slow burn, slow moving. If you're not in, I'm telling you guys right now, if you're not in the right mood for this, you won't like it. And not only
Yeah,
won't you
don't.
like it, you'll be bored.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, don't watch this if you're tired.
Yeah.
This is not a good time to watch. Like,
No,
you need to
I
watch
made
this
that
like,
mistake. I got
yeah,
home
you
from
have
that
to
one
really be up.
job. Yeah, it was like midnight or something, and I'm like, okay, it's only like 40 minutes. I'll just go ahead and I think I had to be up at
Knock it
like
out.
5 in the morning or something the next day, but I'm like, okay, I gotta at least watch this first episode. And yeah, man, you want to talk about something that could put you to sleep pretty quick. I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna make this. I
Mhm.
actually think, no, that was the second day. The first day I did get through the first episode, but then I had to go to bed immediately, and I really wasn't in the right frame of mind. So yeah, you do
Yeah.
have to be in the right frame of mind to watch this thing. You can't just, hey, I'm going to put this on and it's some swashbuckling action thing. But again, I think that depending on how this hits you, it could be a good or a bad thing. And honestly, even with my own viewpoint on it, it's sort of like the things that I like about it are things that I don't like about it in a sense, because it doesn't really feel very Star Wars like to me.
Mm-mm. It definitely has a completely separate feel from what most people would think from Star Wars. I mean, like I said, it's almost like Rogue One, but at least with Rogue One, you have familiar things like stormtroopers and things like that. We haven't seen any of that yet, so it's really just almost its own entity. But you just happen to know that it's in Star Wars.
Well, and again, I mean, and we say this every time we review the first few episodes of any of the shows that we reviewed, is that, look, we can't sit there and start to try to judge the entire series yet because it's
Right.
too early. And especially this, right? Because usually in these Star Wars shows, we're getting like, 8 to 10 episodes? This thing's like 12. So
Mm-hmm.
we're in this, and I have a feeling that once Mon Mothma starts to come into it, once Saw Gerrera starts to come into it, once you get,
Mm-hmm.
there's a female character who's like an Imperial officer or something like that. Once you start getting some of that stuff in there, I think
Sure.
it's going to start to feel that way. And I mean, even getting to some of my notes on this first episode, which is Kassa, which obviously is showing you, hey, we're going to start to delve into the background. The murder of the 2 corporate sector authority officers really was kind of reminiscent to me of that whole Rogue One scene
Mm-hmm.
where he killed the informant.
Yep.
And of course that's the scene that's the catalyst that basically is the core of what this 3-episode arc is all about. Right? Is the fact that, okay, he's looking for his sister, and he goes to that brothel or whatever. There's another new thing that we see in Star Wars.
Yeah. Very adult Star
Well,
Wars show.
and let me just because this is another thing that I wanted to address, and this is something that I read in some of the reviews, particularly on IMDb and a few others, where there's some people where it's kind of like it doesn't feel like Star Wars, and there's other people it's like an adult Star Wars. Voyager saying,
Mhm.
Eric, be very careful. The problem is that I think that people see, to me, The Mandalorian is almost like a true adult version of Star Wars in a lot of ways. I don't necessarily equate having to, make it, I guess, bringing in all these other things. I don't necessarily think that that's like the more adult version of Star Wars because, again, I think what they're going for in this is not necessarily making a more adult-themed Star Wars. I think what they're doing is they're trying to take an espionage thriller type of a show and just set it in the Star Wars universe. I think that that's really more accurate of a depiction.
I don't know. I mean, no, I kind of see your point. However, I will say that the difference to me, Mandalorian seems a little straightforward. Mandalorian kind of has cutesy, stuff to it with like Grogu and things like that, and Ahsoka, and like I said, it still feels like the typical Star Wars in a way. Yes, there are some adult moments definitely, and like when you see like spikes going through like stormtrooper helmets and stuff like that, or okay, sure. But this, I mean, this, and even by like your definition of espionage thriller, that's more adultish anyway
It
because
is.
it takes more thinking. It takes more of a like Mandalorian is kind of straightforward. Okay, you got a bounty hunter. This is what he does. He's just walking around, collecting bounties, and then he runs across his kid, and and they go on these little adventures. Oh, how cute! You know, this though is a little bit more adult because okay, the manner in which he does things and where he goes, like you said, he goes into a brothel. Now, granted, you're not seeing like, naked women out and Twi'leks, all over the place or anything like that. But you do get that vibe when you walk in there. Like
Well,
when
you
you
get
walk
that
in there,
vibe anyway. I mean, even going back to Return of the Jedi, that was basically a sex yacht that Jabba
well,
was
Jabba,
on. I
yeah,
mean, there were,
that's true.
and the other thing too, and this is what drives me nuts, is everybody thinks that in order to make an adult themed anything, you have to put a bunch of violence, a bunch of sexual themes, all this other stuff. That's not necessarily what makes it adult. I mean,
Adult.
that's definitely a quick path to making it adult. I mean, those
It's
are
the dark
definitely,
side way.
yeah, those are very adult concepts. And I mean, don't get me wrong. Yeah, she put that in there. Boom, instant adult
It's the
themes.
adult. Yes.
But what I mean by it is more, what you're dealing with in the way that you're presenting it in a way. It's not necessarily.
Well, yeah,
It's
and that's
darker.
what.
And the
And that's well,
Mandalorian's
not
darker.
just that. Well, not just that. Yeah, it is darker, but what I'm saying for Andor, the fact that like we said, it's not just you can just casually watch Andor and pick up what's going on. Like, no, you
True.
really have to focus on it
Yeah, but
because, and
here's
it's
my point though. And this is why because this is the first foray into this kind of thing. I would not categorize this as the first. It's almost like I'm gonna be fighting myself here, but it is an adult themed Star Wars show. But I don't think it's truly an adult themed Star Wars show. Because in order for it to be truly an adult-themed Star Wars show, it would have to feel more like Star Wars and have some of the more Star Warsian types of things. And what I'm pointing to is a lot of the novels. If you were to, say, make movies out of some of them, that would be more what I would say the true definition of an adult-themed Star Wars is. That's the reason why I kind of said that this whole thing is kind of like it's really more like just a standard adult themed film just dropped in the Star Wars universe. And I mean, it sounds like semantics, but it isn't.
well, I'll say this: we've only seen 3 episodes, so it's kind of still, once again, kind of hard to judge it just yet. As far as if it's truly that, I would just say for
You're
right
right.
now,
It could pop up and start feeling like Star Wars by episode 6 or something.
So I would just say for right now, it has it has adult themed vibes to it. Like it really has
Well, all right. Here, let me clarify it like this. If that didn't have the Star Wars title in front of it, what in there actually indicates anything Star Wars? It could just be a sci-fi movie. If you're really honest with
I agree
yourself.
with that.
And
No, I
that's
agree with
why
that part.
that is why I say it's not an adult-themed Star Wars show. Because it's really more of a sci-fi show. In fact, there's very little that really even ties it into the Star Wars universe. I mean, if it didn't have Star Wars on the name, a lot of people wouldn't even know it was Star Wars. I mean, other than the
True.
fact that Cassian Andor is a character from Rogue One. But if you just look at the
Yeah.
way that it's presented, it could just stand as a sci-fi film.
I agree with that.
And that's the reason why I say it's not truly an adult-themed Star Wars show. Now, and this is something that this is what I was thinking, but I didn't realize it until Voyager just brought it up. because I'm like, what does this feel like to me? And he hit the nail on the head. He says it feels like Blade Runner. And yes, that is exactly more along the lines of what it feels like to me, like a Blade Runner thing, or kind of that ilk, you know. But
Gotcha.
again, I think that what it's showing you, though, and this is because this is something that you and I have talked about. So you can have an adult-themed Star Wars thing, which, in my opinion, they have yet to truly make. Now, I do have to say that you bring up a very good point where you're like, all right, slow down. Let's just wait and see what the rest... Make that statement on episode 10, not episode 3. And I agree with that. But, I mean, just from what we're presented thus far, right? They have yet to make what I would categorize as a truly adult-themed Star Wars show. That said, what they have done is something that I've wanted even more than an adult-themed Star Wars show that you and I have talked about a lot, is take just normal genre films, you know, and just set it in the Star Wars universe. Why can't we have a horror film set in the Star Wars universe? You know, I'm not saying that I would necessarily line up for a romantic comedy, but hey, why not have a romantic comedy set in the Star Wars universe?
Oh, a romantic comedy would be hilarious, especially if you had like Han and Leia story.
Completely. And I mean, because see, the thing is, I like romantic comedies a lot, but they have to be done right. You know, because sometimes they can be a little bit too sappy or whatever, and that's when it gets, but if they're done well, they're amazing. A buddy cop movie set in the Star Wars universe. You know, things like that. And so what we're getting so far, at least, seems like we're getting a really cool espionage thriller set in the Star Wars universe. And I love that.
I agree. What do you think about the main antagonist so far?
So, if you're talking about Cyril,
I think that's his name.
Okay. So he would be the guy that wanted to investigate the murders.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's Cyril Karn. Cyril Karn is basically the guy. So so the guys are killed by Cassian because they kind of jump him, and you know, he leaves them no choice, right? So basically what ends up happening is Cyril kind of sees this. Voyager says Cyril Crazy Eyes Karn. He basically sees this, and his superior officer is basically like, look, dude, you know what? I mean,
relax.
Just write this off as an accident, you know, set it somewhere outside of where people are kind of hanging out or whatever, and just, you know, let it go. He, of course, doesn't want to let it go. And then he ends up finding a second in command who feels the same way he does, right? That guy, I forgot his name, but he basically, you know, gets this guy who has his own little squad or whatever, and they think alike. I thought he was actually really cool. I like the fact that they have, again, this is one of the things that they did with Kylo Ren, where they gave us, I mean, he wasn't technically a Sith Lord, but he was pretty much a Sith Lord stand-in, right? So, but he was unhinged. He was unlike any of the other Sith Lords we'd ever seen. And the Cyril guy is kind of the same way. I mean, I guess you could compare him a little bit to Hux or somebody like that. But I mean, he's like this guy who's really dedicated, and he's, you know, really kind of standing up. And again, because we're reviewing all 3 episodes, I mean, we're going to try to go somewhat linear, but we are going to be bouncing around. I mean, this isn't going to be like a play-by-play review. It's really more of a discussion. Again, this whole show is basically like if, you know, we're just all talking about this stuff. I mean, if you're talking about this with your friends, you're not going to sit there and, you know, do it in order, right?
Plus, I mean, with it being, I mean, granted, it was released as 3 episodes, but really it's one story.
Yeah, it is.
So it's like,
exactly.
It's kind of like one and the same, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you really get to it, like when you get toward the end, right? When they're in that battle in the town, now the guy, you know, he starts out, he tries to come off all tough, but he comes completely unglued, and he's just kind of useless.
Well, I love the fact, I mean, that whole the whole scene that really really got into the depth of character, and this is what we mean by character building is this is why I brought him up in particular because there was a lot going on with him.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of starts off as this like guy who's really trying to. It seems like he's really trying to impress his boss.
Yep.
He wants to move up within the ranks and whatever. He's sucking up and doing all this crap, but he's super kind of like by the book, and he wants to find a way to kind of move on up in the world. His superior officer, like you said, is kind of like, look, write this off. Trust me, these guys were jerks anyway. They probably got what's coming to them. Whatever. It's a moot point. Of course, he wants to, he circumvents that and still, and goes ahead and investigates. And so then now he's teams up with this other guy who, like you said, feels the same way that he does, and they kind of go off, and he puts his little squad together, and they go out into the town. But so this guy, he kind of has Cyril. He kind of has this very stern, strict, like, okay, like let's get with it, like get with the program. To the point where he's yelling at his superiors, like, "Come on, let's go! Like, what are we waiting for?" Like, so he comes off very confident, very
Mm-hmm.
very confident, and then he gets on this ship when they right before they land, and the guy, his friend, basically says, "All right, well, give the guys a speech,"
Yeah.
and he has no idea
Yeah.
what to say. He's just like,
That was, and that's something I had
priceless.
in my notes, because we see the speech basically in the second episode, which is called "That Would Be Me," and it's kind of like, yeah. So he gets these guys together, and then he's it's like, okay, give him the speech, and right, he completely doesn't know what to say. He's out of his element, and
Hmm.
that's the first crack in the armor that we see actually in this guy. Because I'll be honest, in that
Yep.
first episode, when I'm pretty sure it's the first episode. It could have been the second one. Where the dude was they're kind of on the bridge or whatever, and the one officer's like eating his blue noodles or something, and it's like, oh, Cyril's
Hmm.
coming basically, right? And he comes and he's kind of barking orders at all these guys. That kind of felt a lot like Starship Troopers to me.
Hmm.
There was a lot of, it was sort of
Even their
like,
uniforms.
yeah, right. I mean, just that whole scene with the uniforms and the way they were acting. I mean, there was very much what I guess it could just depend on, how it really hits a certain person, but to varying degrees. But it felt a lot like Starship Troopers to me. And that was why it was really cool when he gives a speech and it's just like, he's terrible.
Yeah, everybody's looking at him like, okay, like it's like a football coach. The first time he tries to give a pregame speech and it goes flat, and
Yeah.
he's trying to rally his players up, and people are just like, okay, what the heck was that? So yeah, that was priceless, and I thought that brought some levity a little bit to it,
Mm-hmm.
to the without it being too tongue in cheek. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it was, but it also showed you something about him though. Like, okay, you can tell like he still has things to work on, and he's still nervous. And then as they're moving through the town trying to, find Andor, um, you see pockets of moments where he's kind of like, okay, he's not as sure of himself as he thinks he is.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah,
love
because
that
it's kind
about
of
this
like,
character.
well, and you could tell even he was used to being more or less far away from the action, right? He's just kind of the superior officer. He's barking a bunch of orders. He's obviously never been in the thick of any kind of a battle or anything like that. So it's kind of like you said, right? He's finding himself. Like he aspires to be a character that is the guy in charge. That's who he wants to be,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sort of like in the execution, not so much. So just let me just because we're kind of now moving into episodes 2 and 3 a little bit. So let me just finish a couple of thoughts that I had from episode 1 that I just wanted to get out of the way. First of all, the droid BT or B2 EMO, just kind of like which of course he just calls B.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really enjoyed that droid. I love the fact of how they always give these slightly different personalities. Now, I have to admit, B basically reminded me of a combination of K2SO and then Dio from the Rise of Skywalker. It was kind of like it gave me a similar vibe.
Okay.
But I really thought he was cool. I thought Bix Calleen, I don't know if Bix is going to be, you could tell they have a past. You could tell that Cassian and her definitely have a past. You don't know if there was any kind of a romantic thing going on there or what the deal was, but I enjoyed her character a lot too. And then of course, it's just one of those things where I think that overall, so far I like the corporate sector authority kind of standing in for the Empire, and I'd sort of like the direction that's going. And of course, one of the first things that hit me about episode 2, because it's one of the first things that we see, that bell ringer dude is really into his job.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just like, it's a thing, man. And I mean, there's obviously some reverence thing to that. And these are the kind of subtle things. And again, this is one of the things that's really cool about this show is that there's a lot of subtle things happening that they don't necessarily put right out there and explain. But in this town, which, I mean, I'm not even really sure which town it is, honestly. Could be like Ferrix, or it could be part of Morlana. I'm not really. I'm still trying to.
Ferrix.
Is it?
They left
is it Ferrix?
Morlana. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Ferrix. Yeah.
All right, because if that was one of the things that was a little weird to me is that they kind of Voyager confirmed that it was Ferrix. They sort of moved from those two towns somewhat interchangeably, and they didn't. I mean, at least to me, they didn't have there's a slightly different feel to them, but it was seamless when they went from one to the other.
Yeah, Ferrix is more kind of like that town vibe. The other one, more Morlana, is more like that big city where Cassian was, where he shot those two officers.
Right. Whereas the other one, is a little bit more outskirts of, type of a thing. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was cool. So yeah, the bell ringer dude on Ferrix, I thought was just he was just really into it. Man. He really into it, and it just shows you that there's a vibe to this stuff, and it makes you want to know more. This is also where we are introduced to Luthen, who is basically that mysterious guy that pretty much comes off of that ship or whatever, right? Like he's the guy that's looking for Cassian. And one of the scenes that I loved in the episode, so his name is his last name, Rail, I think. Luthen Rail. I believe that's his name. Like I said, keeping the name straight, guys. it's tough. You see the beginning of Luthen coming to Ferrix pretty much in episode 2. And then, of course, he lands in episode 3. One of the things that I thought was cool, it was a very understated scene to me, was when that passenger dude was talking to him. And they were kind of having that little conversation, that older dude with the mustache. I kind of want to know more about that guy. I mean, it was one of those things where there's a lot of rich character building in this thing, and it felt organic, it felt natural. And this is why I say that I love the fact that they just dropped a genre-based movie in the Star Wars universe, because it didn't necessarily feel like I'm watching a Star Wars fantasy sci-fi movie, I mean, I could have been watching a scene from, I don't know, like Murder on the Orient Express or something. I mean, it was just a very natural conversation, and it felt very real to me, and I was very happy to see that. And I ended up really enjoying that. I mean, this guy's like a side character, and then, of course, they land in the third episode, and then they sort of have a little bit of a banter as they're getting off of the ship, and then the dude's like, all right, whatever, and you almost wondered, because they're bringing a lot of attention to this guy, is okay, is he going to try to stick around, or is he, what's his significance or whatever? And sure, he could pop up in, I don't know, the 7th episode or something, but I have a feeling he's just, one of those guys. Hey, we're having a little conversation on the space train here, and, it's okay, off he goes.
Right. The thing about, like I said, Andor, which I really like, is the vibe. Like, it's very, once again, real world. I know we keep saying that, but that's because, like, even based upon that side character, right? You got some old guy, like, you're just trying to sit there and just wait on he's on this transport trying to get down there, and it's just no different than any of us here, in the real world, where you get on some bus or something like that, or a plane, and somebody just happens to be sitting in your row and strikes up a conversation with you out of nowhere. They're like, you may not even feel like talking, but it's like, I don't want to be rude, so okay. And that's kind of what it was. And so I like that feeling that you get in Andor, is because you can relate. It's a lot of relatability to, from everything from that guy to the jealous boyfriend who
Tim.
was, yeah.
Yes,
So
I'm definitely that whole story arc between Tim and Bix, and then Cassian. That was actually, to me, really cool, because you could tell right away that Tim just didn't like he didn't really hate him. It just, I think he's kind of jealous of him, and he's not really sure, hey,
he's
Bix
not
and
sure
Cassian,
Cassian's intention.
yeah, he doesn't know what the intentions are. And what was really cool is when he actually does the whole betrayal thing, and tips off the corporate sector authority. It's like, okay, there's some weaving in some really cool storylines, right? There's complexity to this, and that's another trait where we said that, sexual themes, violence, swearing, all that stuff, that would be the quick and easy path to adult themes. A lot of what makes something adult is the complexity.
Yeah, I mean, the complexity of the story. I mean, and they did have that whole sexual moment, when she comes off after work and she stops by and she starts taking off clothes.
That's true.
Like,
Yeah, they did.
All right,
they did.
So, I mean, but that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what everything feels very real world. It seems like,
well, yeah, but even that, right, just kind of felt more every day. Like, it wasn't in some sort of lavish kind of thing. It was just,
it's like an everyday type situation. And that's what I mean. Like, that's what makes this show really relatable, is because it's stuff that people experience kind of like every day. Like, whether you're sitting next to the guy who's chatty on the bus, or your girlfriend comes over and she's stressed from work. You fill in the blank. So
right.
then then you got a jealous boyfriend who's got a friend. Your girlfriend's got a guy friend that hangs around, and they seem a little closer than you feel like they should be, but you don't want to inquire too much because then you don't want to come off jealous. You got people at work trying to come up in the ranks, and they're trying to, well, I'm just trying to do my job and be the best at it, and maybe this will get me noticed by this boss or whatever the case. You know what I'm saying? Like, all of these themes are very, like you said, real world relatable to stuff that we see or experience every single day, one way or another. And so that's the cool thing about Andor so far. And even Andor himself, right? Like, he's even keeping himself kind of secretive away from people that he's kind of close to, like B, the droid that you mentioned. And then we come to find out the older lady that
Marva
comes into the
Marva's another interesting character too, because that's kind of his adopted mother, right? That's the one. And we really see this at the end of the 3rd episode, where they alluded to it in the 2nd episode, where you actually see he's Kassa at this point, right? And they basically go to scope out that ship, him and his little tribes people or whatever. And, that Republic officer gets spooked and just starts shooting, and then they hit him with all these darts and everything. And then, and then, of course, he's actually brave enough to go on the ship because he wants to see what it is and all that. And then Marva and her partner end up finding him and B, of course, is there too. And, he can't even speak basic or anything like that. And she basically takes him in. And then, of course, that's alluded to in the second episode, but it's really juxtaposed, I thought. And again, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but at the very end of the third episode, where they're basically showing Cassian is escaping and he's leaving, and you could feel that he's gonna cut ties with his past, and you see that juxtaposed with the beginning of that journey when she finds him, takes her to his ship, basically is going to adopt him as her own. There's a very bittersweet moment in that, because they also show her in the present realizing that Cassian may be gone for good.
Leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that whole moment was very emotional. It's but I even love the whole way that she was describing the moment as it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
That was really like awesome to me. Like, oh, this is just a calm before the storm, and then you're kind of wondering, like, okay, well, what's Cassian about to do? Like, and you're thinking like, okay, he's about to just turn into this like ridiculous like action star or something like that. But it's just, you see how crafty he is. You see how even when he meets Luthen in the warehouse, the conversation that he has with him, like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, he's like, well, what difference does it make where I got it from? Like, I got the box, you got the money, like, what's the problem?
Well, and that's also where we get that really cool speech too, where he's kind of like, the Empire's so fat and whatever that, somebody like me can go in and blend in, that whole thing, which of course we saw that in the trailer.
Right. And what we learned about Cassian throughout this is like he's met a bunch of people, but he's kind of like a weird Han Solo in a way.
Kind of,
That's
yeah.
the way I was because he's made a somewhat of a life making friends but also swindling them at the same time. But he has such a charismatic personality, I guess, in his own way, where people haven't quite dealt with him like they probably want to. And it's probably because he always finds, a way out around it. And that's kind of who Cassian is from what we can see thus far. Because, he's running to people in the town, that one guy, he's like, oh, he brought that one big tall dude, that weird alien.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, oh, you're with him? Really? Like, and then you could see him trying to manipulate the situation, like you're watching him like manipulate, like, okay, well, you're gonna trust him, really? And it's very cool. And I think that's even why Bix is kind of like frustrated with him, because I think he doesn't want to be that way with her, but in some ways he kind of feels like he has to.
Well,
and then
it's
he keeps
basically
everything
like
kind of close to his vest.
Yep, and that's it. When you made the comparison to Han Solo, that was a good one. And the reason I think it was good, I was thinking that, but I wasn't really thinking that consciously. Because I did notice that Cassian seems to, much like Han Solo, try to keep people more at arm's length, right? It's like he has people in his life, but maybe other than Marva, nobody's that close to him. And that's by design. Let's see, Voyager's got something here. Let's deal with that, because man, there's some stuff in episode 3 I want to get to. He says, what I don't get is how Cyril knew to look for a Canary man in Ferrix. I know the madam from the Brotham told him about Canary, but how did they know about Ferrix? That was a little strange to me at first, too. Unless it was somebody that overheard or something, because the only thing that I know is he did tell that woman in the brothel that he was looking for his sister, and she was Canary and all that stuff, and I think that's probably what it was.
That's what it was. And then, of course, with him being within that vicinity, of course, when they put the APB out for him, and then, of course, Bix's boyfriend, Tim, responded like, yeah. And especially because I think he overheard.
He did. He overheard her.
He overheard something about Canary.
Yeah, right.
And so that's what made him go like, oh, and then he made the report, so that's how they knew.
Because he made the connection, exactly. But
Right.
it's true, is that he is a lot like Han Solo that way. And I mean, there's a couple of things too. Like, I really loved Cassian's whole chemistry with B, because it really is the precursor to the K2SO droid, which we are going to get K2SO in this series eventually, probably the second season. And the idea is the second season is going to butt up against Rogue One. It's pretty much going to end right before the events of Rogue One. I don't know exactly if it's going to go into it like Rogue One does A New Hope, but it is going to definitely hit that mark at some point. So that's going to be interesting. But I love the scene where Cassian is talking to B while the corporate sector authority guys are raiding the house, and they're listening to the whole thing, right? It's just kind of like, I mean, that was such a great scene to me. Because number one, that was really funny, because you don't usually see that. But then secondly, it's just the whole dynamic between B and Cassian, I thought, was kind of a cool thing. It was not quite as buddy type of thing like K2SO was, right? Where K2SO and Cassian's almost like Han Solo and Chewbacca.
Right.
But it was a really cool thing. And then, of course, the other thing, which, I mean, of course we have to talk, as another aside, the cinematography in this show is just insanely good.
Man.
But one of the things that I thought was cool about this episode is the whole thing where they start, banging on the metal and stuff like that. And, while the corporate sector authority is marching through town, and you could just feel like something is going to happen, because, and you could tell at first they're not really paying attention to it, right? Because they think, hey, we're pretty much the law around here. But it's kind of like there's a sense of dread that you start to get as this is going on. Like, I'm starting to think the hunters are going to turn into the hunted or something. And then when Marva gives that whole speech about, hey, kind of hear all this stuff? Yeah, when you got to start worrying is when the banging stops. And they're like, well, wait, what's going to happen when the banging stops? It was just that whole scene and that whole setup. And when they're marching through town, I'll tell you what it actually reminded me of. For anybody that saw The Wicker Man, the original in particular, not so much the Nicolas Cage one, but the original Wicker Man, and even the sequel, The Wicker Tree, to a lesser degree, but especially The Wicker Man, because The Wicker Man is basically about this guy who, he's a cop, and he's investigating, the disappearance of this girl. And so he goes to this island, which Christopher Lee, a little Star Wars connection there, is basically kind of the guy, and he's just going around. He's the cop. He's like, hey, I want to know this, I want to know that. Long story short, you can tell that he's being slowly maneuvered and everything, to where you realize that by the end of the movie, he becomes the victim, that they lured him there. They lured him there, and it's sort of like he's over there thinking the whole time that he's the one in charge and everything, and the reality is he's the victim. And that's kind of the vibe that you get with this scene, is that these guys are marching through Ferrix thinking, hey, we're looking for this dude or whatever. And you could see, at first they start jumping in, and of course they jump the gun and they start engaging Cassian and Luthen before they were supposed to. And then everything falls apart. And like we had mentioned earlier with Cyril, how he basically falls apart. And then of course towards the very end of the episode, when, they blow up a bunch of their troops, and, Cassian and Luthen get away, and it's just kind of like Cyril's just standing there as if his life is over. Right? Yeah, basically.
Well, yeah, because he realized that, he was responsible for those lives, like those people who were serving under him. And I think that's where he realized, not being cut out for battle, and really understanding, okay, this is what happens. He's used to being away and making orders for people, but now he's experiencing what it's like to lead from the
Yes.
ground.
Yes.
And I think that's where that shock and awe came in for him.
Right. And also to jump on that point firmly, he's also learning the consequence of his orders.
Yep.
He's just giving stuff, and it's like, yeah, here's what happens when your plan fails, and you're the guy that's out there having to deal with the consequences of that.
And now they're asking, okay, what do we do next? And he's just like,
yeah, right. It's like, I got nothing, man. So,
yeah.
I mean, I guess a couple of things are, I want to get on the thoughts of what we might see in episode 4, what you expect. Before we do that, what were the things that you liked overall? What were some things that you didn't like overall about these first 3 episodes?
Things that I liked. You already mentioned one, the cinematography. I love the fact that it was like we figured anyway. It's a very grounded, real life situational show. I liked. I really didn't get into it until maybe halfway through the second episode, and then that's when I really started to like, okay, it's getting some traction with me. And then by episode 3, I was really kind of into it.
Yep.
Especially when things kind of started, heating up, and we started getting to the meat of the matter. I really want to know what that box is, because I know it's supposed to make you like untraceable.
Yeah, it's a star path or something is what it's called. But yeah, I know they kind of glossed over that. I mean, there's a couple of things that I'm actually curious about too. I'm wondering if Luthen is actually starting to recruit for the rebellion. Like, I think he's working for Mon Mothma, and he's trying to find people.
Yeah. And I think that's what it is. So the things I liked, like I said, I love the realism. I love the fact that it looks very real, like a real lived-in universe. Even with the way that they shot a lot of stuff, I think it's practical. Let me just say that. Some of the characters, like I said, like I love Cyril. I love that character already. Cassian is, of course, interesting. I want to know more about Marva. Like she's one of those people I want to know more about. Things I didn't like. The slow burn.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to, it just takes a little bit longer than I felt like necessary to get to it, but I like the build up at the same time. It's kind of weird, but the other part of it, it's kind of weird because Diego Luna's accent sometimes gets in the way of dialogue for me. Like I have to really focus on it because you still hear that his native tongue, which is fine, but it's just like when delivering certain lines, sometimes it's hard to really catch like what he's really saying. So that, and then the flip-flopping of the juxtaposition of the tribal thing, and I just really want to like, okay, like how it just randomly happens. I just
Well, and here's the thing. So as far as the whole Mexican accent part of it, what's interesting about that is he made the conscious decision to keep his own accent.
To keep his accent
in Rogue One, right? And I know what you mean. It's like there was something about, because first of all, just to end the mystery, I mean, I'm pretty much echoing all the things that you liked and disliked. The only thing that I would probably add on the like category is the character interactions. I really, really loved the character interactions in this. I thought it was more organic and more real. I thought there was depth. I think there's things that they can explore in future episodes. I just think that overall the character dynamics and the interaction between those characters was really intelligently and smartly written. Now, on the other hand, with things that I didn't like, I'm going to echo all those things, especially the slow burn thing. I think is okay. And again, it's really kind of tough to put that in a... It's almost difficult to judge that too harshly because
Mm-hmm.
I want to see it more in the context of the rest of the series, maybe, but I do agree, though, because I think, honestly, they could have condensed this thing down to, like, 2 episodes at the most.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I mean, it didn't have to be that slow-moving.
Right.
Sometimes I think there's a temptation, that it's kinda like, ooh, it's gonna be more adult and serious if it's, no action really, and we make it really slow and all this other stuff, and it's like, well, a slow-moving thing doesn't necessarily make it smarter, and I think that
Right.
it's almost like they were trying too hard to juxtapose it to what we normally think of as Star Wars, and again, I do enjoy I like the tone, I like all that stuff. I like the fact that, and I said this as soon as I saw it, that it felt less like a Disney Plus show and more like an HBO thing, like an HBO drama or something. And so that was cool. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't tighten it up a little bit and make it a little bit, make it move a little bit quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But that also brings me to the other point when you were talking about sometimes his accent made certain things hard to understand. A lot of the mix I thought was a little strange too. Like the dialogue was too lost in the rest of the sound.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, yeah, you really had to focus and you had to concentrate. But I mean, other than that, I would say it's a really, really solid, good start to a series that before now I really didn't think that I needed, but it does fill in some canon stuff too. We have to remember this is a Star Wars show after all, and
Mm-hmm.
it's gonna help us. And I'm hoping that once they had Marva, okay, finding, well, Kassa at the time, right? I'm hoping that ties up at least the little tribesman part of the thing, right? I mean, I don't mind going maybe into his older teens or something, because they did say they were gonna show a little bit about how he was technically part of the Separatists and a little bit of how the Clone Wars affected him. I remember they almost have to do that, I think, because of the stuff that he says in Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
They have to explore that part of it. So I'm hoping that we're done with, little Kassa, and we're going to get more teenage Cassian if we do flashback at all. I mean, I'm personally fine
Mm-hmm.
if they don't. So, given that, what do you expect to see in the next episode?
I expect to see more in-depth conversation between Cassie and Luthen, especially about Cassian's father. And I think that's because that was one of the key moments where
Mhm.
Cassian was like, "Wait a minute, how do you know?"
It's almost like
And
the super.
his
How do you know that name?
right, exactly. So I think that's going to be really interesting to kind of find out, and I think we're going to go back to that era too, as far as his hair, like his background, like where did he come from, what that whole little Aborigine island he was on, like what was that all about? Um, and I think that's post Clone Wars. That's what I think. To me, I think the Clone Wars happened and he ended up there kind of surviving. That's just my guess. Um,
Well,
but
I
we'll
don't think
see.
so. I don't think so, and here's why. So
I don't care what
this
you think. I'm
this show takes place 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is essentially 5 years before Rogue One,
hmm.
and the character's supposed to be like around 32 years old. That's
Hmm.
technically how he's not. He's like 42 or something like that. But Cassian is 32, 5 years before the
Hmm.
Battle of Yavin, and so for him, he looks like he's about 10 or 11 in the little, avatar scene, so that we see,
Avatar scene.
which would put it, like roughly 20 years before the present day, right? And so 20
Hmm.
years before that, it would, I mean, it could be a little bit before the Clone Wars, like it could be maybe around episode 1-ish, or maybe right before. Well, because Clone Wars starting after 2, so yeah. I mean, it could be around there, but I mean, given the whole speech that he says in Rogue One about him being a separatist and how, the Republic kind of... The whole separatist thing didn't really start until the Clone Wars because of the whole disagreements and stuff like that, where the Republic people kind of split off. So that's going to be really interesting, kind of like you said. Well, where are they going to... If they do any flashbacks to when he was younger... Where's that going to land in the series, in the saga, or whatever? So does that pretty much wrap up what you are expecting for episode 4?
Yep.
All right. Well, for me...
Oh, and we figure out that box thing, but other than that...
Oh, yeah, the Star Path deal. And it's true. I mean, they did kind of blow over that whole thing. So it does seem like that should play more of a prominent role eventually. I'll agree with that. Again, just a couple of things that are adding to what you're expecting, because those are really good points. But I would like to see who Luthen actually is. I'm expecting that maybe, and who knows, maybe that won't be revealed till episodes 5 or 6, or who knows. But I'm pretty much expecting maybe we're going to find out a little bit more about him. And that's a good point too, because him talking about Cassian's father, that's really I think that's going to tie into it all. And if he does reveal how he knows Cassian's father, then I think that's going to also, play into who he is. Another thing I'd like to see, actually, is the fate of Cyril. Because when last we left is this whole defeat, everybody forgets that he wasn't even supposed to be doing this in the first place. He was supposed to be passing it off as an accident or something, and that was it. So my thing is, when that older officer dude comes back, well, is it...
And he was meeting, and that's the thing, he was meeting with the Empire.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm kind of wondering, is he going to get in trouble? I mean, is there going to be fallout for this? What's going to be happening? Maybe that's when we get that female Imperial officer. Maybe that's how she comes into it. So, I want to see what happens to him. And then finally, I want to see if Bix ends up finding Cassian, and does she end up maybe joining the rebellion too? Does she have something to do with the whole Star Path thing? How's all this stuff gonna play out? So those are a couple of the things that I'm expecting to see in the next episode. And of course, both of us have, of course, what you guys, I mean, you still have, probably a half a minute or so to chat in and let us know what you are expecting to see in the next episode. And speaking of the next episode, we're going to be back on Friday, Lord willing, job willing, at at 8:00 live, where we are going to be obviously reviewing the 4th episode, because the 4th episode comes out in 2 days. So we're pretty much going to find that out. So, we want to get your thoughts. Voyager, you get Voyager in there before we go. He basically says, Coruscant, let's go. I want to see some Coruscant. And I actually wouldn't mind. Here's a question for you, though, before we go. This actually does bring up a good point. So we like the fact that, there's more complexity, a little bit more adult theme. We like the fact that it's basically a genre, like an espionage thriller dropped in the Star Wars universe. How much Star Wars stuff do you want to see in this? Or versus how... You know what I'm saying? I mean, I know I'm probably not.
You mean like things that's
like Coruscant.
Familiarities.
Yeah,
familiar Star Wars tropes, if you will.
Or like fan service.
Or places.
Because, Tony Gilroy, one of the things that he said, and hey, the first 3 episodes are definitely living up to this. He says, look, there's not going to be any fan service in this thing. no Easter eggs to look for, no fan service of any kind. But the problem is, you could go too far the other way, because the problem is like, look, dude, if you're going to go that far to where, you're digging your heels in the ground, it's like, well, it is a Star Wars show, though, I mean, it's like, otherwise, you might as well just make a general sci-fi film.
Well, I mean, I don't think even going to Coruscant would be necessarily fan service unless it really serves the story. Like, because like once again, like Mon Mothma, like if she's coming from Coruscant, like that makes sense.
Sure.
You see what I'm saying?
Like,
I wouldn't
that is the center of everything too. I mean,
yeah, it's the center of the Republic, and so I could understand why that wouldn't be. That wouldn't to me. That wouldn't necessarily be fan service. It's just like no, that's part of literally the story. But I mean, like fan service would be like, oh, okay, she's leaving Coruscant and Yoda is wishing her goodbye or something like that. That would be fan service. Like, okay, like
right. Like, look, it's Darth Vader. He pops up like in a bar on a monitor or something, like
right,
addressing
exactly.
the crowd or something. Yes, that would definitely be fan service. It should be pointed out too that Coruscant's kind of at the center, right? Canary is actually a mid-rim planet, and some of the other mid-rim planets include like Kashyyyk is a mid-rim planet. Oh man, what are some of the other ones? There's like a few other of the kind of well-known planets that are mid-rim planets. So it really isn't beyond the realm of possibility. It's like you said, right? If it fits the story, that's fine. But yeah, if Yoda's like, hugging her goodbye or something stupid or, and that's what I would like to see too. I would like to see that balance of, look, you don't have to cut all the Star Wars out of Star Wars in order to make it, more complex themes and stuff like that. Right.
Yeah.
You don't have to be afraid to do that. So that's what I'm hoping to. But again, we're going to find out. I mean, look, we're going to be with you guys on this whole journey through the show. And I guess, did we figure out when Tales of the Jedi actually premieres?
October 26th.
Oh, so it's in a month.
So that's what the internet is saying, October 26th.
Well, all right.
I could have swore they moved the date up, but
I thought it was in September because I thought it was one of those things where like, man, we're getting Tales of the Jedi
like days after.
Yeah, days after or something like that. Well, we'll keep an eye out for it. But the plan is, because there's definitely going to be some overlap, right? I mean, Andor's going to go into, Voyager says, yep, October 26th. And all 6 episodes drop. And a lot of that is because they're really short. It's not like...
Yeah, 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes. But it's still good enough to do a review. So what we'll probably end up doing, because I'm sure there's going to be some overlap, is when Tales of the Jedi. I'm still in the adult brothel.
Yep.
All right, Ahsoka, But
all right.
So when Tales of the Jedi drops on October 26th, it's definitely going to overlap part of Andor. So what we'll do is we'll just dedicate our Monday show to that, and then we'll continue the Friday show with our Andor review. So you get review shows for a little while, at least while these shows are going on, which is what's going to really make things interesting. Because that all that content that we keep promising everybody all the time, what might end up having to happen is if we're just endlessly reviewing shows every week on Monday and Friday, we're going to end up having to make like additional, like if we want to talk about,
the news.
Yeah, like our news or the general stuff, we might actually have to just like record episodes or whatever and just drop them here and there, or maybe even finally fire up a Patreon or something like that, for that kind of thing. But we'll basically cross that bridge with no guardrails when we come to it. But basically, until then, we got this new episode of Andor dropping in a couple of days. We're going to be reviewing it right here, Friday at 8. So everybody's homework is to watch Andor and then come running back to us on Friday, and we'll talk about it. So until then, Definitely hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you guys haven't already done so, because again, helps the channel. Algorithm likes it. We want more people to participate in this stuff. If you're watching the rebroadcast of this, let us know what you think of the first 3 episodes of Andor. What are the things you like about it? What are the things you don't like about it? The discussion continues in the comments, everybody. So until Friday at 8, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.